Nice. Welcome to another episode of Survival Mode. I have I just met her last week and we just really connected. Her name is Sam Hunter. She is a survivor, brain tumor survivor, a veteran, doing so many amazing things out there. And I was super excited to be introduced to her and to hear all the good things that she was doing. And I had to have her on the show to share a little bit about her story. And hopefully you'll get so much out of her growth and how she's helping others. So welcome, Sam. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you, Todd, for having me on the show and
Uh,
helping me spread the message of what we are trying to do with my organization, Winks.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely talk about it. So tell me a little bit about yourself, kind of your background, kind of growing up and a little into this adult life and then into your experience that I can't wait to hear.
So I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. Spent most of my childhood there with a couple of years spent in New Orleans. I grew up in a two-parent household when I was younger, but my parents split. And it was really a difficult childhood. Um, but life has had it such that I've overcome so many difficulties in childhood. So I was a very smart student and I skipped 11th grade um, and moved on to the 12th grade to join the Navy at 17. And the reason I joined the Navy was for the GI Bill. I knew education was my way out of a very difficult situation. And so I wanted the GI Bill. I was only supposed to join for a few years. A few years turned into almost 25 years. Um, but I still achieved the objective of getting an education. And so I was fortunate enough not only to get my bachelor's in computer engineering while I was in the Navy, but I also earned two masters, um, one in cybersecurity and the other in national studies, national strategic studies from the Naval War College. So I still achieved the goal in the end.
That is impressive for sure. And thank you for your service, in serving this great country. And, I always think, and one of the things that you and I had shared when we were talking was, we have both kind of a challenging childhood and we hit a point and I joined the military too. My life wasn't going well at all. I kind of was, was raised by some parents that had some challenges and it was tough. It was
We
tough.
discussed that, yes.
And I made a decision because I knew that education was the key, just like you, which I thought was fascinating when I heard your story. And I had no way to pay for college because I didn't qualify for loans or anything. So I joined the Army and the GI Bill happened to have paid mine. So I totally respect that part and commend you because you drove on, right?
Yes, yes, same with you. But yes, I drove on. I think my life prepared me for the challenges that I've seen in life, starting from an early age until now, and even through my brain tumor diagnosis. So I felt well prepared, and even though life was difficult, I don't know if I would change much about it.
For sure. That's awesome. And I can't wait to hear a little bit more about that. So tell me, so you were in the Navy, you retired, right? You were retired from the Navy and you were working, right? So
Correct.
where in the process of where in this timeline of your life did you start to feel different that led up to your diagnosis?
So interesting enough, I started feeling different way before they finally diagnosed me. I was still active duty in the Navy at the time, and I started having some numbness in my face. And they did an MRI of the brain and they did an MRI of the spine. They did not find anything. That was way back in 2000.
Mhm.
Fast forward to 20 end of 2014, I was running, I'm a long distance runner, and I was running the Marine Corps Marathon, and my leg buckled at mile 9. Now I've been running in somewhat in a not in the best of shape because my legs were giving me a problem, but I didn't think it was anything that I could not overcome with pain management and physical therapy. So I had a lot of pain management and physical therapy. Long story short, I completed the Marine Corps Marathon in 2014. I probably shouldn't have. People knew I was having a difficult time on the course. And I had a lot of friends just pulling for me. And of course, my husband and my family were always there for my long runs. And we left DC, came back home, and we went straight to the emergency room. I ended up on crutches that night, but the thought was that I was having an IT band issue in my leg. And so that continued on until about March. The Marine Corps Marathon is in October 2014. Come March of 2015, and I am about to run in a relay with other people from my run group. We're going to do a relay marathon. And I was out of town. Had this really strange feeling in my legs. I'd never felt it before. It almost felt like what I was calling spasms. So it
Mhm.
happened late that night. The next morning, I had to get up to go somewhere. It happened again. So immediately when we got back in town, um, I called my doctor. First of all, I informed the team that I was running with that I didn't know if I was going to make it or not, um, and wanted to give them a heads up. And then that following week, because we ran that Sunday, this was the weekend, I ended up running. So I ended up running that Sunday, probably against better judgment. But we actually did pretty decent, and we came in first place of the relay team for that marathon. I followed up with my doctor, and basically they were like more the same: pain management, physical therapy. You're a runner, and so runner has been a blessing, and it also has been a curse because everything was attributed to running. And so I went on for months like this. It was probably another 4 months of having these spasms, but they were getting worse and they would happen at any time. I can remember vividly one day I was running and it almost felt as if my shoe had become untied. And I looked down and my shoe is tied. And I have no idea what is going on. And so I went to physical therapy. And here's where physical therapy really helped me is because I had a physical therapist who had tried just about everything with me. And the week before I was diagnosed, he looked at me and he said, I really feel your doctors have missed something. He said,
Mm.
we've tried everything in physical therapy and you are not making any progress. So I really believe your doctors have missed something. And
Mm.
that was about the week before I was diagnosed. Um, so the week of the diagnosis, I went in on a Thursday because now I was having a hard time walking. Um, and I went on a Thursday to the emergency room and I explained to them, hey, I'm coming in because I'm having a really difficult time walking. I've had these leg spasms because I'm still calling them spasms. And the doctor said, I know exactly what you have. He said, you have tendonitis in your ankles. So he gave me some naproxen and sent me on my way. That was Thursday afternoon. Sunday night, I've been feeling terrible all weekend. Even though I still went out for my walks because I was a runner,
Mm.
Um, I stopped running a few weeks prior simply because my running partner had told me, she said, I don't know what's going on, but we're just going to walk until we can figure this out. And so I'd walk that weekend, but feeling terrible. Sunday night, I go to bed, and all of a sudden, um, I am, I wake up from my sleep, kind of in an alarm state because I'm feeling this spasm. And this wasn't the first time it happened in sleep, but my husband and I had a routine. So he came over. I was like, can you feel it? He's like, no. But then all of a sudden it started walking. So he would massage my legs. All of a sudden this thing started walking up my left leg. I could feel it crawling all the way up my body, across my abs, my chest, my neck, and
Uh,
finally into my head. And immediately we were like, emergency room again. And so we had a 5-year-old at the time. So we grabbed a 5-year-old, got him in the car seat, headed to the emergency room. Didn't even think to call 911. I think we were just saying, get me there soon. And so we didn't want to wait. So we headed up there. We got there, and they thought I had possibly had a stroke.
mm,
And so they were like, okay, we're going to have to do a scan of the brain. And in between them getting me from the triage area to go to the scan, the doctor comes in, and immediately I recognize him as the doctor I seen Thursday afternoon. Now it's Sunday, close to midnight. So, um, I people would say that's a coincidence. I call that a wink. And so he was like, "What brings you back?" And no, I said, I recognize you. I was just here Thursday." And I pointed at him and he said, "So what brings you back?" Almost in a condescending type
mm,
of way. Um, and so I explained to him what was going on. They did the scan, and that scan was so quick. He comes back into the room where I'm waiting with my family, and he says, "You have a mass on your brain." And that is just news you are never ready to hear. You can never prepare yourself for that. And in that moment, I started to tear up.
mm,
And my husband looked at me and said, "We believe in God." And so from that moment on, it changed from why me to why not me. I've always talked about my faith. So now this is the time to walk in my faith. And so in that instant, things quickly changed for me. So it wasn't, we didn't, he wouldn't even allow me to have a pity party. We, we had older kids. So we actually left the hospital after, I don't know, 10, 15 hours, because I was there until the next afternoon. Um, and then we went to tell our older kids what was going on. And immediately after that, we started researching. We needed to know what I had, what was the standard of treatment for what I had. Did the doctor, because before we left the hospital, they had already scheduled my surgery, had already done all the pre-op workups, um, but we were not comfortable with just having one person tell us this is what was needed. We needed to find out if we needed a second and a third opinion, and so we started looking, and we found. And another thing, just to have the thought of somebody touching your brain, you want somebody who's been doing it for a career, not somebody who is called the neurosurgeon that is operating on people's spines, right? And so, and we found that was the case with the doctor who was scheduled to do my surgery. So we called,
so the person that was scheduled was not necessarily the brain expert. He did a lot of spines. Is that?
that's correct. And so, I mean, we had to really do our research.
Yeah.
And so when we found that out, my husband Googled, and I always say Google is your friend, and he came across Duke Brain Tumor Center. And on their site, they say, you don't need a doctor's referral, just send us your information and we'll look at it. And so we sent in, and we gathered the records from the hospital, sent it into Duke. And I can remember Henry Freeman calling me, and he told me, "I have just the doctor for your surgery." His name is Alan Freeman, no relation, because they both have the same name. And then I started researching Dr. Freeman, but he was the first person. So he did a phone consult with me initially because he is in North Carolina and I'm in Virginia. But I told him what was going on, and he was the first person to tell me those spasms I had were actually seizures. And no one, even in the emergency room, even speaking with the neurosurgeon at the hospital, no one told me that. As a matter of fact, they had given me muscle relaxers because they didn't know what they were. And so immediately he put me on a seizure med, Capra, which is a very common seizure med. And so we went in, it was my husband and my daughter who went with me because my daughter is a young adult. And we all just observed Dr. Freeman. And what I will say about the approach, it was so different. Whereas when I went into the emergency room and saw the neurosurgeon at the hospital, it was kind of a canned kind of approach. Um, he really didn't base much on any examination of me, or he just looked at the records and said, "Hey, this is what you need." When I went into Duke to see Dr. Freeman, he did like all these things, these tests to test my strength. Not only test my strength, but even test my mind. I can remember him asking something like how many, and I don't remember the exact amount, but how many nickels are there in $1.35? And I got it right really quick. And it was something like that. And so, but then he was like, after looking at it, the plan was to give me awake brain surgery. So they had prepped for everything for me to be awake. Yeah, they had given me the little index cards. They had questions. They knew about my family history. They knew the things I liked, I didn't like. And so while he was working on my brain, I was supposed to be awake. But interesting enough, when they woke me up, so I remember them waking me up. I remember them trying to get me to focus. But interesting enough, I had such it was a pain like I had never felt before in my hips. And I could not focus because the pain was almost unbearable. And so Dr. Freeman, as they're trying to kind of make me stay awake and go through this, Dr. Freeman finally made the decision. He said, "Put her back to sleep." Yeah, and I was like, "Thank you," because the pain, for whatever
I
reason,
would.
was unbearable. It wasn't the head pain because I knew he was in my head. That wasn't the issue. It was almost as if my hips was in a vice grip. And he later told me that was the first time that had ever happened in awake brain surgery. But I always say it's a wink because he was still divine intervention. I wrote an open thank you letter to him um, because he managed to get most of it out. One of the big issues he had told me the day before surgery, because I was like, "I'm anxious. I'm ready to get this over with. I'm ready for you." And he said, "No, you're not ready for anxious for the surgery, so to speak, or ready to have the surgery. You're ready to have the surgery over with." And I was like, "Good point, good point." But he said the biggest risk I had was I was going to be paralyzed on one side
Oh,
because the meningioma had been there for years. And so the speculation is it could have been there as far back as 2000, but it had been there at least 8 years. And so it had kind of attached itself to my brain. And I should have looked it up, but they did a procedure, and I can't remember the exact name of the procedure, the day before, where they actually went in through the groin and cut the blood supply to my tumor um, in hopes of lifting it before the surgery, that it would start lifting off the brain. But he was prepared that if it was stuck to my brain, that they would have to leave some of it. Um,
mhm.
but long story short, he actually, it was like, I think the surgery was a little over 5 hours, but he got most of it. He even went in because my tumor had been there so long and kind of grew what I call tentacles. He even tried to go into the falx, which is that center groove between your hemisphere, to remove some of it. But I started bleeding out, so he pulled back.
Wow.
Um,
So let me ask you a question. I'm going to back up for a second because
okay.
I'm fascinated by this. So you go to the ER the second time, you see the guy, they think you're having a stroke. They say, "Hey, you got a mass," right? And of course, It's a gut punch. You know what I mean? There's no question about it. So what goes on at the hospital for this long amount of time? You know, what were they do? You know, because I know my experience, but like what was going on? Did they have neurosurgeons come in? They had neurosurgeon come in and do all this stuff. What was going on?
Yeah, so that is a great question. So immediately I find after finding the mass on my brain or the tumor, one of the things I'll just add is the doctor came in and he apologized for his
Hmm.
attitude towards me because he said, we are not trained to look for worst case scenarios. But he said, had we been, you are a textbook case for what you have, down to the leg weakness. It's described as a meningioma on your parasagittal region in the falx. So he did. So I have to give him credit for that. But then the rush was on. Like, you can't leave the hospital. We have to contact the neurosurgeon. And so the neurosurgeon finally made it in, I want to say like 6 that morning or something along that line. So then we had to go up and see the neurosurgeon. He went through his procedures and then he was like, you have to have surgery within, I think he said 30 days. And so he said, given that, before you leave the hospital, you have to schedule your surgery and do all your pre-ops. And
Mm.
so that's where the time was at, you know. And I had my 5-year-old with me, so we're sleeping in chairs. I'm in the hospital bed, you know. It was a long night, and I should have come home, and we should have went to sleep. And I can remember me and my husband coming home, and I think I laid down for 30 minutes on the couch, and I was like, because he had asked, "Do we want to go to DC and tell our kids?" And I was like, I'm so tired. But then we just hopped up and we drove there to tell our kids, which was like one of the hardest things in this journey that we had to do. They knew I was at the hospital the night before, they knew I'd been having problems. Um, but we knew we could not tell them over the phone. I called one person while I was in the emergency room to inform him, and that was my brother who actually lives overseas. And from his reaction, I made the decision we could not tell our kids over the phone because again, right now I know I have a brain tumor. I don't know anything about the type of tumor I have. I don't know, you know, you start thinking about your lifespan, you know, and so we wanted to be face to face to tell our older kids. And so
So what was his reaction?
my brothers,
Yeah.
yeah, he was very emotional. He could not believe it. And again, he knew that I'd been having some problems because, you know, I have several siblings, but my brother and I are the closest. And he knew I was having some problem. So he was very emotional, but he made the trip from overseas to be here with me and my family. Him, his wife, and his newborn baby traveled here to be with me when I went into Duke. And so they got in that morning that my skits the day before my surgery was scheduled. They got in early that morning. I had to be there the day before, and they went up there with us and stayed with us throughout.
So you get the diagnosis in the hospital, and you said, you know, you were teary, which is normal, right?
Yes, yes.
Because
You're
I was
not
like that. I
expecting
was
it.
like if you really, there's two things. There's one thing that you said that really hit home. And when I was going through it, there was a brain tumor. There's a local brain tumor organization here, and the guy wound up talking to me. He goes, Todd, he goes, they're going to mess with the CPU of your body. You just got to understand that. And
Yes,
it's the oddest thing because it's not like you're getting a joint replaced. Like, oh, here's my joint. This is the thing that is actually moving in your mind.
controls. I mean, it's your control center,
It's your,
right?
and you know, and not to make like everybody always, you know, people always have this proverbial like, oh my God, do I have a brain tumor? Like, you know what I mean? And then I know from my experience, but you know, you get a diagnosis of, man, you got a brain tumor, you got a mass on your brain. So What was the sadness period? And your husband kind of jumped in to kind of, help you. What was that whole process? Was it like a couple minutes? Did it take you a couple days? Did it take
No.
you an hour? Did you like kick yourself in the, you're like, I gotta kick myself in the butt and get going here?
So interesting enough, I had all about a minute to have a pity party before my husband jumped in. And so this is why you need the right people in your life at the right time. And
Yeah.
so from there, we got the diagnosis. We're waiting in the hospital. I'm calling work because that's how my mind works. Called my boss and said, "Hey, don't know if I'll be coming back anytime soon. Just found out I had a brain tumor." And so I talked to him, and that day, I think I talked to my boss twice. He eventually, called me and say, "Hey, do you want me to tell your team? Because I have a team working for me." And it took me a minute to think about it, but I was like, "Sure, you can let them know," because at that time I didn't know if I was going to make it back in to work. And so he informed them. And then again, from there, I really did not have time to focus on exactly what it all meant for a few days because I was so focused on taking care of my kids, my two adult kids, and I had a 5-year-old at home, but also I had a team at work that depended on me, and I had a lot of unfinished business, so to speak. So the very next morning, I'm literally sitting in my dining room with my laptop trying to close out some loose ends as my husband is researching Duke Brain Tumor Center. And so that's how my mind thought is I need to take care of all these other things um, before because I knew I needed surgery. And so that's where my mind was at, is like, take care, close out all these loose ends because you don't know when you may be able to get back to them.
This is where I think you and I are kindred spirits is when you were sharing that now and when we were talking before, I was the same way. I was like, okay. I called my boss. She goes, I said, well, I'll be back Monday, like I literally diagnosed Thursday. They kept me overnight. And then to your point, the first guy in the hospital was a spine guy. But he was upfront. He goes, listen, I don't do too many brains. I'm more of a spine guy. The brain guys will come and see you tomorrow. But I did the same thing you did. I said, I was at a small facility. I'm like, there's no way I'm having brain stuff here. And I went and researched and went to a larger facility. And honestly, just to kind of like circle back, the guy who was the neurosurgeon that did the brains, the chief of neurosurgery who I saw, like he was the only one that picked up on the subtle neuro thing, like my hand and how.
Hmm.
But the one thing that when you were sharing your story was something made sense to me. I used to be a medical device and rep in the hospital. And I'd walk with some of my reps. And for the prior 2 years, I would trip over my left foot. I go, what's wrong with me? To the point where I would tell somebody, like, what's wrong with me? And it was this weird thing. I said, am I getting old, dragging my feet? But those little things, you just don't know. But to make that, when I went to see my neurosurgeon, the one who actually did my surgery, he goes, I'm going to put you on steroids because there's some inflammation around it until the surgery, which will be in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, all right, cool. I'm back at work. I'm like, yeah, I'm coming back. I could do that. Right. So I go back and it took me, like, I did a few days and I was like, I can't do this. Like, and it wasn't because of the emotional side. Of course, there was an
Hmm.
emotional piece, but my brain wasn't working well. It was just kind of weird, it was
It
working, but it
is.
wasn't.
Yeah. So I actually went back to work for a few weeks before my surgery. Again, trying to close out those loose ends. I was diagnosed in late July. I did not have surgery until late August. So I had some time in between to go to work. And I will tell you, my team was fantastic with everything that was going on. And I always live by this motto with my teams is if you take care of your people, they will take care of the work at hand. And, it was almost as if I prepared for a moment like that. And my team still um, keeps in touch with me till this day. I've left work quite a few years ago, but they still keep in touch with me. So just my experience was a blessed experience. As blessed as I think a brain tumor journey can be. The tremendous support I received from my work team, my church team, my running group, my neighbors. I mean, everybody kind of rallied around, and of course, family and friends. But it seemed like so many people rallied around me during this time that I never felt alone in this journey.
That's
Um,
amazing. Tell me, you said this comment, which I love. You went from why me to why not me. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So I really, and it happened just that quick, is the fact that, you know, you always want to believe things like this happen to somebody else. Um, and what would my response be if it happened to me? And I had to learn quickly. Um, it was okay to have a momentary pity party, but you can't you're not effective in your response if you let pity get in the way. And so my thing was, how do I beat this? I had tremendous support, and it was really I I say I live by faith. This was really my chance to prove it. So I always tell people family, friends, and faith got me through my brain tumor journey, through that walk. Not to say every day was a great day, because that is so far from the truth. But I knew faith would keep me going forward. And so that really is the why me versus the why not me.
I love it. I love it. Those were things I dove into too. And I looked at it as a learning experience. Like, what's this here to show me? Like, because I researched. The one thing I didn't do was I didn't research my tumor, because I didn't want to, I just didn't. I knew it had to come out. Let me figure this out. But what I researched was, how can I be better and get better?
Oh, wow.
And like, I dove into diet. I said, what's missing in my life? And it was the I overworked.
And we can definitely relate to that. I think the one thing that kind of balanced me with my overwork is I ran a lot. I mean, I did. I always carved out that time, even if I can remember we would do with my running group 5 at 5. So we'd go at 5 in the morning and run 5 miles before going into work. But I always carved out that little bit of time for myself, because it really was, even whether I was running with my group or running by myself, it really was my time to kind of, I would say, I almost like a meditation time. It's a spiritual time for me, looking at the beauty that's here in the world, talking to God. And so I always carved at that time. And I think my fitness level at the time of diagnosis really helped me with my recovery. And
Mhm.
so that's why I say running can be that curse. Like, everybody's ignoring everything because you're a runner and you do this to your own body, versus it helped me recover. I mean, I ran my first mile 1 month after surgery, and moved forward from there. So,
I
yeah.
ran too. I ran my first mile a month, because I'm not a runner like you. I'm a 5K-er, 10 max. Not a marathon, but I do run at least 2-3 times a week. So I could appreciate that. And yeah, I think I went back to work too soon, but it was because, like, I think there was just some stability and structure. Like, even when I got the diagnosis and I had that time, I grind. I did it until I felt like I probably shouldn't.
Mhm.
But I agree with you. For me too, with the faith, I was like, this is God wants me closer, for sure. and what can I learn from it? So tell me a little bit about, so you had the brain surgery, because we talked about that. Tell me a little bit about how the recovery was for you.
So actually, the recovery, I forced myself almost to recover in a short time frame, and really, it was really trying to um, kind of regain my life. I was focused on if I could just go back to work in 6 weeks, um, things would get back to normal. And so, interesting enough, my job, you had to get approval through a medical clinic to get back to work. And so I went to one of my treating physicians and said, "Hey, I'm in great shape. I'm ready to go back to work." And I was in work in 6 weeks. Some people just could not believe it. I look back now and said, if I had it to do all over again, I would have taken my time returning to work, because I returned to work. And of course, with brain tumor, I couldn't drive. So I actually had a friend who's a coworker who would literally come pick me up at the house, and I would ride in with her. And the good thing about that, though, was it controlled the hours I spent at work. Before the brain tumor, I could spend a good 10 to 12 hours at work and then come home and still do work. But because I couldn't drive and I was riding and I was dependent on somebody else, it was now an 8-hour day. And I did that for 6 months. And then slowly, after I was able to drive, I could see my time creeping back up and spending long hours. My husband would call to remind me, "Hey, gotta come home. You can't overdo it." And I needed that every now and then. And so I literally went back to work almost about 7 months, 7 to 8 months after going back to work. I found out I needed radiation. And
Mm,
so, as I was preparing for radiation, I continued to stay at work. Um, and then during radiation, my doctor wanted me to pull me out for the entire 30 treatments, which is 6 weeks, because you get 5 treatments a week. And I was like, "We are having this major event going on, and I am the responsible manager. So can we kind of negotiate?" And my doctor, he was my radiation oncologist, and um, he was willing to work with me to a large degree. And so what I would do is I would go into work in the morning. I would drive myself to radiation in the afternoon, and I would repeat that for the 30 days. And I think in my mind and my psyche, as a workaholic to some degree, to a large degree, um, you feel that people, they need you there. They need you to make this happen, right? And you want to believe that they need you there. Um, and so I think that, again, trying to get some sense of normalcy back, um, trying to trying to be there for my team, trying to be there for the company and the organization, because this was a major event that was happening. Um, Sometimes you put yourself on the back burner and you don't realize the toll it takes until your body says enough. Um, I will also share, I had in my corner a neuropsychologist, which I never knew existed until one day I'm in there with my primary care provider, who's um, he's kind of the center for all my other physicians, and he keeps my record. He was really good, and he was like, "We have a neuropsychologist on staff. Do you want to go see him?" And I was like, "What is a neuropsychologist?" So he explains to me. So I went to the neuropsychologist. Again, I'm still at work at this time. And my neuropsychologist came to the conclusion rather quickly that my job was too stressful,
mm,
and that I needed to make the tough decision. But he left it up to me for at least some time. And then finally, he was like, "You really have to, either you're going to try to fully recover or you're going to work, but you can't have
mm,
both."
mm,
And so I made the tough decision after radiation. It was probably a few months after radiation was complete, because that's when I really started feeling the effect, is after radiation. Um, I made the tough decision to leave a job and a career that I had worked on even during my time in the Navy. So I just transferred my skill set from the Navy to the private sector. Um, and that was difficult. He did, however, say, well, if you want to keep yourself engaged, you can take a class here or there. Um, but as life would have it, I always take things too far. And so I enrolled I enrolled in the executive MBA program at the College of William and Mary.
Wow.
And so that was, I will say, so I was not new to graduate education, because as I mentioned, I already had 2 graduate degrees, but it was different this time. I even had to take advantage of some of the accommodations that they give you, like additional times on tests and stuff, which was all new to me. And for a long time, I would not even go talk to anybody about accommodations. But by the time I got to the second half of the program, I was like, okay, I really need these accommodations. And so I I can't say enough about we were in a cohort, so we were in the same small group of 20 something people the entire program. And I can't say enough about um, that cohort in helping me through the program. And so, I mean,
Wow.
again, such a blessed journey of people being willing to help. I think the toughest part for me is adjusting to asking people, you have to, and I when I talk to others, um, especially caregivers or patients, I say you have to sometimes put that pride aside, um, to do what's best for you or your loved one. And so sometimes that's a difficult thing, especially growing up the way I did, and really feeling that I have to give 110% so I don't end up in a situation like I was in my childhood. And so that, I think that made it difficult. But and what I found out in this journey is people want to help you, but you have to tell them you need help. And so I think that's a really important point of, yeah, put that pride aside, ask for the help you need, and you'd be surprised at how many people are willing to put it out there and support you as you go through a journey like this.
I love, like, I could identify with so many parts of your story. It's hard. I actually had a virtual visit with my primary, so mine happened around COVID. And I said, "You get all the paperwork?" He goes, "Man," he goes, "Yeah, I saw it." And I told him when I was meeting with him, I'm going to work in a couple of days. He goes, "Todd, are you?" He goes, "Maybe you should, take another week off." And I could relate to your journey, because, there was times I felt like, okay, I could do this. And then there was times I'm like, that wasn't a smart move, because
Yes.
the brain felt it, I felt it. And I love that, it's funny, I was 49 at the time. It was 48, 49, just at that kind of time. And I'm like, who at 49 has a nurse navigator? And they're saying they have a medical psychologist, and I did the same stuff, and they were helpful, to be
They
honest,
were, yes.
because it helps point out the blind spots for sure. And I love, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna slow down, then you go to school. Like, I love that, because that's I can relate to that, because and I think, to be honest with you, when we were talking the other day, I really did an inventory of myself, and I was like, what's the what I believe could be part of this, right? And challenging childhood, lots of trauma, mental trauma, which leads to these behaviors, like what, overworking, all this stuff. And I
Yes.
felt gas pedal was on with the brake, always doing something. And I'm like, this trauma stuff has to affect my body. And it was the biggest piece I overlooked. I ate well, I ran, I physically dealt with stuff. But the one thing that I think is interesting is, like, for me, this was an eye opener. It was a way to be like, to learn. And you did the same thing, like the self-reflect, connect to God, right? More so.
Yes.
And you're right. Like when I posted mine on Facebook, I felt like I had a living eulogy, the people kind of wrapping around me.
Oh my goodness. Isn't that an amazing feeling? I will share with you the Marine Corps Marathon. So I completed the Marine Corps Marathon 3 days after I completed brain radiation. I did it in honor of Terry, who was a shipmate who'd been diagnosed a couple or a few months after I'd been diagnosed, and she passed away as I was going through radiation. I was already planning on running the Marine Corps Marathon before I found out I needed radiation. And my doctor probably was a little bit hesitant, but he supported me through the decision. And so I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I lost my train of thought, forgive me. So I ran the Marine Corps Marathon in honor of Terry, and that was so important to me. Again, knowing that it probably wasn't the best decision, but I was doing it with that purpose in mind. And so everything I do with this organization of Wings, I do it with her memory. Because again, I feel so fortunate and blessed that I am still here with the opportunity to kind of make a difference for those who have the challenges of a brain tumor or brain cancer, because we know all brain tumors are not malignant.
Right. And just because it's benign, it's not fine. Yeah. So you said yours was a meningioma, which so correct me if I'm wrong, it's not cancerous,
It's
right?
not, it's benign.
It's benign. And I guess in the brain tumor world, they said benign is not fine. Or I've
Yes,
heard
that's
that.
that's
I've heard
exactly
that.
right.
So why did you have radiation after? Why?
So my particular brain tumor was, I can remember at Duke, and um, when they did the procedure, gosh, I should know the name of that procedure, before the day before the surgery, and one of the doctors came out to me. She said, "Did you not have any symptoms because your brain tumor is large?" And that's when it really hit me how large my brain tumor was. Um, and so, because it had been there so long, um, and it was large, there was a great chance of it recurring. And I remember the number was given to me of about 40% chance. So initially, from the very beginning, both the neurosurgeon and the radiation oncologist agreed that I needed to have surgery and I would have radiation. And
Okay.
so it was supposed to be kind of back to back, but the surgery went so well, and the Dr. Freeman got a good portion of it out, that we were on the fence as if toward making it on the fence on making a decision if I needed radiation. And so after a few months of being followed, if the decision was made that I needed radiation. And so again, I think the effects of radiation impacted me more than the surgery itself. I did have one of the biggest side effects I had from the surgery is, again, they thought I was going to be paralyzed on the left side. And so I do have some numbness in my left foot. It's almost as if my toes, the middle three, are one. I don't know how else to explain that, but other than that, very little residual from the surgery.
Wow. That's fantastic. So mentally, I know we talked about it, and sometimes I feel a little bit, sometimes slip on words, forgetful.
And you just saw that happen, right? So
I
that
can relate. I did it at the beginning of this.
so I'm like, I just lost my and so you know what? I've learned to cope with that. At one point, that used to be somewhat embarrassing, but now I've learned to cope with it. Even if I'm speaking in front of people, I'll tell them just a minute, it'll come back, you know. And now I don't even know if the brain tumor or just aging, right?
That's the confusion part. You know what's funny, and maybe this will help somebody that's listening. I celebrate the wins when I got something like, I'm like, I can't believe I remembered that. Like, I'm better than you, and you don't have a brain. You know, like I'm like celebrating wins. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
So that's awesome. So that's awesome. So you had this experience, and then you started Winks. So tell me what led to the inspiration around this and what Winks is all about.
So the inspiration was really the people that I go back to the friends, the family, and the faith. You know, having such a tremendous journey as I walked in faith. And I go back to the support system and knowing that I was not in this alone. I think that does something for, we talk about the physical, but for the mental, the emotional, the spiritual is knowing that you have people you can lean on. And so, literally, before I went back to work in that 6 week period, I was in a lawyer's office with my husband saying that we wanted to start this nonprofit to help brain tumor patients and caregivers. I think they thought I was insane at the time because I literally went with my head still wrapped in bandages with a little beanie on. Uh, but I was that determined that, you know, God had told me that this was my purpose. This is the purpose that came out of my brain tumor journey. I was blessed not only with a tremendous network, but I was a retired naval officer, so I had health care. I went for a second opinion, but they would have allowed me to go for a third opinion. Our catastrophic cap for no matter how much it costs is really relatively low. And so, you know, I was not in a situation where I had to worry about paying my bills or paying for care. Um, and so, but I knew that wasn't the case. Even when you go in and you see other patients at your doctor, you know that's not the case for everybody. And so for me, I was like, I always tell my kids, God blesses us to bless others. And this was my opportunity to live those words. And so literally started shortly after surgery, started standing it up. Then I found out that I was going to need radiation. So I put it on hold and then thought, wow, it's a good idea while I'm on hold to go get my executive MBA to help me to help
I
me
love that.
effectively run this nonprofit. And so what Winks is about. So for your listeners, it was originally called Winks from God. Long story short, I was talking to a neighbor and I said, you know what? Everything in this journey has gone almost exactly right for me. And I said, I don't believe in coincidences. And she said, my son calls those winks from God. And so that's where the name came from. We recently changed it about a year, it hasn't been quite a year, about a year ago, in order to broaden the appeal. We don't want people to think if they are not from a certain religious background or they are don't have a certain level of faith that we will not assist them. So we changed it to Winks, and Winks is always with intentional kindness and support. Because we want people to understand we are intentional about helping and giving the support needed, whether it be emotional, logistical, financial support, so we can help them through this brain tumor journey. We are a small nonprofit, but our goal is to help as many people as we can. And so some of our programs are, you said it's an eye opener. So one of our programs is eye opener, and it really is about its purpose is twofold. It's to increase awareness, to provide patients and caregivers the information they need to make informed decisions about care, but also to communicate the needs of the brain tumor community to the community at large. Because, I often say to people that we tend to give our treasures or our contributions or donations to causes that are close to our heart. Sometimes it's a relative or somebody we all know somebody who's had breast cancer or prostate cancer, and those causes get a lot of support from the community because they are close to a lot of people's heart. But the chances of being diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor is less than 1%. And so people can really go a lifetime without knowing somebody with a brain tumor. And so we think it a heavier lift for us is to make sure people understand not only that brain tumors of all other cancers have a lasting and long-term effect on your physically, cognitively, emotionally. It's huge financially as well. Cost of care for a brain tumor, brain cancer is the highest of all cancers in that initial year. And so just making people aware of how important it is that we provide assistance to patients and caregivers. There are a lot of national organizations, but as it should be, a lot of money. So I won't say a lot of money because there's still more money needed for brain tumor research, but relatively speaking, research gets more funding than patients and caregivers, taking care of patients and caregivers. And we need the research because we need a cure for this thing. But in the
I
moment, the patients and caregivers need help and they can't wait for the research to happen as they go through their journey and um, their individual and unique challenges that comes with this.
I agree wholeheartedly. I was listening to a podcast and it wasn't necessarily on brain tumors, but this gentleman was doing something with vets. And he said that billions of dollars go to nonprofits, but the money, it may not get to the place that it really is in the greatest need. Not that there's, not that I'm judging by any stretch, but it just really brought it to light. Like for me personally, as a recovering workaholic, right? That lives a certain lifestyle. I didn't have to, I had insurance like you. I had, I had funds. I wasn't rich, wasn't poor,
Same
but
here.
it's hard. Like you're out, you could potentially be out of the workforce. Um, no matter where you are socioeconomic wise, right? It impacts you. Like a
It
lot of
does.
people they live paycheck to paycheck in life, like regular people, right?
Yes.
And some, don't have it. And I support organizations that provide that frontline support. Like the one locally here, to help pay their heat bill or their rent or
And
get.
that's exactly some of the things, sorry for interrupting you, but that's
That's
exactly
okay.
some of the things that we do. And then you add on to with brain tumor patients, oftentimes the caregiver has to step away from work to take care of patients, especially when you're talking about like a glioblastoma or GBM, which is, as you know, the worst case
Yeah.
scenario. And when you think about survival rate, a 5-year survival rate of 100 people, 7 will still be living after 5 years. So um, your physical your physical state goes downhill really quick in some cases, and so you can't stay at home alone. Your caregiver has to be with you, and I've seen so many caregivers willingly sacrifice so much of themselves to make sure that their loved one, regardless of what the outcome may be, can live with some type of dignity and support and care, and knowing that I will do anything in my possibility to help enhance your quality of life during this time when you really need it.
So, and I'm going to put all this in the show notes, but what is the website for people to connect with Winks?
So the website to connect with Winks is Winks, WINKS, BT, as in braintumor.org. So it's winksbt.org.
Okay, great. And we'll put that obviously in the show notes for wherever this is posted, but it's always good when people are listening, they could jot it down or something like that. And, you know, supporting, you know, and I don't think I've shared this on open mic before, but I was definitely concerned. Like, I'm like, I potentially cannot work, you know, this was before my surgery. Who knows what could happen, right?
Yes.
And so I have a small business too and a job. So you could get disability insurance. If you have a job, you have some of them offer that. But I'm like, let me call this insurance company that I have. And so they ask you those questions. Once you're diagnosed, you're you're out. You're not getting any.
If you didn't have it before, you're not getting it now.
You're not getting, if you, and this is I tell everybody, like healthy people, you should have some sort of disability insurance because, you know, it affects this is an effector for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask you, I always ask everybody this question, like, what was your biggest learning through this experience?
That's a good question. What was my biggest learning through this experience? I think the biggest thing I learned was that I go back to that work thing of, you know, thinking that, like you said, having your foot on the gas and the brake at all times was the only way to live life, and kind of stepping back and seeing that it's okay not to always perform at this high level all the time. It's okay to stop and take a break. Um, you know, it's okay to not be okay. And so I think that was a huge thing for me, of sitting down and talking to the neuropsychologist about not only the things that were involving my brain tumor, but all that other baggage I had been pulling along with me throughout a lifetime that drove me to being this top performer who was, in some sense, trying to seek perfection, but knowing perfection was not even possible. Um, and so for me, I think that was a huge lesson learned. And the second lesson I will say is how important it is to be your own advocate when it comes to your health care. I had a doctor. I mean, I went to doctors for years, but I remember one doctor in particular because I was getting injections in my spine. And he said, we can't find anything wrong with you. And if anybody told you you needed surgery for anything, they would be wrong. I wish I could go back to him and tell him, just because you didn't find it, because he was looking at the place where the symptom was at and not knowing that it was sitting on my brain, you know. And I tell people jokingly, I said, people really thought, and I had doctors who thought it was in my head. Well, actually, it really was. And so, you know, if you know your body better than anybody else, and I always go back, you know your body better than anybody else. And so, if something does not feel right, continue to look for answers until you find one. And that is a huge lesson I've learned on this journey. And I continue to learn that lesson even when I'm dealing with things outside of the brain tumor.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, you shared some of your learning. It's for somebody that's maybe newly diagnosed and, not just a brain tumor, but some gut punch, um, what advice or kind of words of wisdom would you bestow upon them?
One thing I always share with people is one day at a time. You could drive yourself crazy thinking about what is going to happen next, you know, But if you focus and just take it one day at a time, what's the next thing I need to do? Um, because it is, when you get that gut punch, it is hard. And you want to look, I can remember when I heard the words, I think my initial thought was, I'm going to die. And so it's easy to let your mind spin out of control. Um, and if you can't control those, find somebody who can you can talk to. There's no shame in needing somebody for emotional support. But yeah, I always tell people one day at a time.
I love it. I love it. And, I so blessed that you came on the show, that you shared your experience. And, Sam, I feel like we're kindred spirits in a lot of
I
ways.
do too.
And for anyone listening, check out Winks, see what's going on there, and help support anything you can. We're here to help each other, and whatever you could do. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, and I'm sure your story will help so many other people. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. I truly consider it an honor.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. You have a great day.
You do